Every morning, Ethan Rourke left 2 bowls beneath his awning and stepped away. The 2 stray German shepherds would eat only after the former Navy SEAL disappeared inside. Then one freezing morning, Ethan found 5 newborn puppies hidden beneath his truck. Bruno and Mara had been there, but instead of staying with the litter, they vanished into the woods. Ethan first believed they had abandoned the puppies until he saw how badly they trembled at the sound of a rescue van. What had taught 2 loyal dogs to fear the very moment they cared for someone? Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe as we work toward 5,000 subscribers and continue bringing you stories like this. Winter never arrived cleanly in Millstone Creek. It came as wet snow that brightened the roofs before collapsing into gray water along the gutters. It polished the white church at the eastern end of Main Street, softened the cracked brick around Mabel's table, and turned the alley behind the hardware store into a narrow river of mud and pine needles. By noon, the town usually looked as if winter had changed its mind. At 6 each morning, before the bakery lights came on and before the first logging truck rolled through town, Ethan Rourke unlocked the rear door of Rourke's Supply and Repair. He was 50, 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders, and built less like a man who trained for strength than one who had spent years lifting engines, tires, and objects that refused to cooperate. His brown-gray hair had grown long enough to curl slightly above the collar of his combat shirt. Silver showed clearly at both temples. A short, uneven beard covered his jaw, darker around the mouth and thinner along the cheeks. The shirt was an old habit he had never found a reason to abandon. Its olive-drab body fit close beneath a canvas apron, while the camouflage sleeves bore faded horizontal bands around the upper arms. Customers occasionally stared at it long enough to wonder whether they should ask. They rarely did. Ethan had once been a Navy SEAL. In Millstone Creek, that fact mattered less than his ability to restore a generator in freezing rain or coax another winter out of a furnace everyone else had declared dead. He preferred it that way. Machines asked honest questions. A broken belt did not pretend it had forgiven you. A cracked fuel line did not demand that you explain why you had gone silent halfway through dinner. Machines failed for reasons that could usually be found with enough patience, light, and the correct wrench. People were more complicated. Dogs, Ethan had learned, could be both. He stepped into the cold carrying 2 stainless steel bowls. Steam rose from warm food mixed with broth. Beneath the small wooden awning he had built against the rear wall, 2 patches of straw waited behind a low windbreak. He placed the larger bowl on the left. "Morning, Bruno." The dog was not visible, but Ethan knew he was there. A pair of amber eyes watched from behind a stack of worn tires at the edge of the alley. A moment later, Bruno emerged. The German shepherd was 7 years old, perhaps older, with a deep chest, heavy shoulders, and black and gold fur darkened by moisture. Thick hair around his neck gave him the appearance of wearing a rough winter mane. His right ear stood straight. The left bore a thin scar that pulled its tip slightly outward. Bruno stopped 12 feet away. Ethan put down the second bowl. "Mara." She appeared more quietly. Mara was smaller, long-legged and sable-coated, with black-tipped fur running like smoke along her back. Her dark facial mask was uneven, heavier around the right eye, and a small patch of pale cream marked her front paw. One ear leaned sideways whenever she was uncertain. That morning, it leaned far. Ethan backed toward the door. Bruno waited until he had crossed the threshold before approaching the bowls. Mara remained behind him, scanning the alley, the roofline, and Ethan's hands. Only after Bruno lowered his head did she move forward. They never rushed. They never fought over the food. Bruno usually ate more slowly, pausing now and then to look toward the mouth of the alley. Mara swallowed quickly, though she sometimes carried the final piece of food beneath the pine trees beyond town. Ethan had been feeding them for 4 months. He had also tried nearly everything that did not involve force. He had built the shelter. He had left clean blankets there until Bruno dragged them into the woods. He had persuaded Dr. Simone Whitcomb to watch from a parked car. He had hidden a chip scanner beside the food and nearly lost both dogs for a week when its plastic casing clicked against the bowl. The sight of a catch pole made them disappear. The slam of a rescue van door made Mara run before the engine even stopped. Some people called that stubbornness. Ethan recognized it as experience. They ought to be taken somewhere safe, Reverend Collins had told him one cold afternoon outside the white church. They already know how to leave, Ethan had replied. That isn't the same as being safe. No, Ethan had said, but being taken isn't always the same as being rescued. The Reverend had studied him, perhaps wondering whether Ethan was still talking about the dogs. Ethan had gone back to fixing a church generator and had not offered an answer. By 7, Rourke's supply and repair began waking around him. The front room smelled of machine oil, damp wood, rubber, and the coffee Ethan brewed too strong and drank after it had gone cold. Tools hung in careful rows above a scarred workbench. Snow chains were stacked beside fuel cans. A row of rebuilt space heaters waited near the front window with handwritten tags tied to their handles. One read, Mrs. Dooley. No charge. Check thermostat again. Ethan was replacing the carburetor on a portable generator when Mabel Henshaw entered through the front door carrying a paper bag. The bell rang once, then twice, when the door caught on wet snow. Mabel was 61, short and comfortably round, with gray-brown curls and cheeks always flushed from the kitchen at her family diner. Her red and white checked apron was hidden beneath a burgundy winter coat. You left without breakfast again, she said. I had coffee. That is not breakfast. That is an argument with your stomach. She set the bag beside his tools. The smell of bacon and warm biscuits pushed through the grease and metal. Ethan glanced at it. What do I owe you? An apology for asking that every morning. He almost smiled. Mabel noticed, but was kind enough not to celebrate. Her gaze drifted toward the back room. Your 2 guests come by? They ate? You know Hollow Gate would pick them up. I know. They might find homes. They might. Mabel folded her arms. That tone is why people think you are difficult. I repair things for people who think I'm difficult. Yes, and you undercharge them while scowling. It confuses everybody. Ethan returned to the generator. Mabel's humor lingered after she left, warming the room more effectively than the old radiator beneath the window. Ethan ate half a biscuit standing over the workbench and saved the rest. At noon, he found Bruno's bowl empty. Mara's still held a single piece of meat. That was unusual. He stepped outside and studied the alley. Rain had begun mixing with the snow. Beyond the last building, dark firs pressed close, around the road leading toward the forest. No dogs. Ethan lifted the piece of meat and placed it beneath the shelter. He did not call for Mara. Trust, he believed, could be damaged simply by asking too much of it. The following morning, the storm arrived before dawn. Wet snow swept sideways across Main Street, thick enough to erase the windows of the church and cover the hanging sign above Ethan's shop. He parked his old pickup close to the rear wall so he could unload a rebuilt heater without carrying it through the deepest slush. The engine ticked as it cooled. Ethan reached the back door, keys in one hand, coffee in the other. Then he heard the sound. It was so faint that at first he mistook it for metal settling beneath the truck. A thin, broken whimper. He stopped. There it was again. Ethan set down the coffee and crouched beside the rear tire. Cold water immediately soaked through one knee of his work pants. Beneath the chassis, something moved inside a bundle of dark fabric. He lowered himself further and reached under the truck. The bundle was his old canvas work coat. He had not seen it in weeks. Inside it lay 5 newborn German Shepherd puppies. They were pressed together in a trembling knot, their eyes sealed, their ears folded close to their heads. Their coats were still soft and unfinished, 3 mostly dark, 1 pale gold around the muzzle, and 1 so small it seemed barely larger than Ethan's hand. The smallest puppy opened its mouth. No sound came out. For a moment Ethan did not move. He had faced emergencies in places where hesitation could cost lives. Yet the fragility before him felt more frightening than noise, weapons, or shouted orders. There was nothing for strength to push against, no enemy to confront. Only 5 bodies losing warmth beneath his truck. "All right," he whispered. The words steadied him more than the puppies. "I see you." He slid both arms beneath the coat and lifted it carefully. Something firm rested beneath the fabric. A veterinary warming pack, still faintly warm at the center, but cooling rapidly around the edges. Someone had not simply discarded them. Someone had tried to buy them time. As Ethan stood, his eyes caught the tracks in the snow. A set of human footprints led from the truck toward Main Street, already softening beneath fresh snowfall. Around the rear wheels were 2 sets of dog prints, one broad and deep, the other narrow, lighter, circling the coat twice before retreating toward the alley. Near the smaller prints lay a smeared line where one paw had slipped through the mud. Mara. The conclusion came quickly and felt obvious. She had given birth beneath his truck. Perhaps she had panicked. Perhaps she had left only to find food. Perhaps Bruno had tried to keep watch. Ethan looked toward the forest road. Neither dog appeared. The smallest puppy twitched weakly inside the coat. Questions could wait. He carried the litter into the shop, locked the front door, and cleared the broadest workbench in the rear room. Tools went into drawers. Engine parts went into boxes. He spread clean towels beneath the red heat lamp used for warming frozen equipment, then stopped before switching it on. Too hot could be as dangerous as too cold. He called Simone Whitcomb. She answered on the 4th ring. "Whitcomb Veterinary." "Simone, it's Ethan." A pause. "What happened?" "5 newborn shepherds, under my truck, cold, one barely moving." Her voice changed immediately. "Do not put them directly under high heat. Wrap them together. Warm the room gradually. I'm coming." "The roads are bad." "I noticed." She ended the call. Simone arrived 23 minutes later in a navy waterproof coat, carrying a red medical bag. At 46, she moved with the brisk certainty of someone who had learned that panic wasted both time and oxygen. Her dark auburn bob was clipped away from one side of her face with a small metal leaf. Tessa Monroe followed with a portable incubator balanced against one hip. She was 44, sturdy and compact, with black hair streaked in silver and braided down her back. "You found one?" Tessa asked. 5. "That is 4 more problems than I wanted before breakfast." She said it while already plugging in the incubator. Within minutes, the back room became a place of measured urgency. Simone checked heart rates and gums. Tessa weighed each puppy, marking numbers in a small notebook. Ethan held towels, adjusted the heater, and followed instructions without arguing. The smallest puppy weighed far less than the others. Simone cupped it between both hands. "This one needs watching," she said. "But I've seen weaker survive." Ethan looked at the tiny chest. "Will they?" "If we keep them warm, feed them properly, and get lucky." "I don't like plans that depend on luck." "No veterinarian does." Tessa handed him a bottle. "Then learn quickly." The clinic was overcrowded because of the storm. 2 dogs recovering from surgery already occupied the heated kennels, and a fallen tree had blocked the fastest route back. Simone decided the litter would remain temporarily in Ethan's rear room under veterinary supervision. Tessa taught him how to mix formula, test it against his wrist, hold each puppy belly down instead of on its back, and record every feeding. "Every 2 hours," she said. "I heard you." You look like a man who hears instructions and then invents harder ones. I fix machines. These leak from both ends. Adjust your expectations. By evening, Ethan had labeled 5 small spaces on the chart with numbers instead of names. Naming felt too much like claiming, and he still expected Mara to return. The storm deepened. Customers came and went through the front room while a red glow pulsed beneath the rear door. Ethan repaired a heater for an elderly farmer, answered 3 calls about frozen pipes, and checked the puppy so often that Tessa finally told him the incubator did not require guarding. Still, he guarded it. At midnight, he unfolded a narrow camp chair beside the workbench. His olive combat shirt hung over the back. He wore a gray thermal shirt, dark work pants, and thick socks. A towel rested over one shoulder, spotted with formula. The alarm on his watch sounded every 2 hours. Feed, record, warm, wait. At 3 in the morning, the smallest puppy finally drank without needing to be coaxed. It consumed less than a teaspoon. Ethan felt something in his chest loosen. There were victories too small for anyone else to notice. He had forgotten those were sometimes the ones that mattered most. Near dawn, the storm began to weaken. The rear room was warm, red-lit, and strangely peaceful. 5 tiny bodies slept inside the incubator. Ethan sat with his head against the wall, too tired to close his eyes. Then came the sound of claws outside the back door. Not scratching. Waiting. Ethan stood. Through the small window he saw Bruno beneath the awning, snow powdered across his dark back. Mara stood several feet behind him. Both dogs stared at the red light spilling through the glass. Ethan opened the door slowly. Cold air rolled into the room. Bruno did not step forward. Mara lifted her nose. The puppies stirred behind Ethan. One released a thin, breathy cry. Mara's ears flattened. Her front legs stiffened. The pale patch above her paw trembled against the snow. Ethan moved aside, leaving the doorway open. "It's all right," he said softly. "They're here." He expected Mara to rush past him. He expected recognition, urgency, instinct, something simple enough to understand. Mara looked directly into the warm room. Then she turned her head away. Mara did not enter. She stood in the wet snow beyond the doorway, her body angled as if half of her had already decided to flee. The warm red light from the back room touched the sable fur along her face, catching the uneven black mask around her right eye. Behind Ethan, one of the puppies made another faint sound. Mara's jaw tightened. Then she turned her head away. Ethan remained beside the open door, one hand resting on the frame. He had expected fear. He had expected confusion, perhaps even a warning growl if Mara believed he had taken her pups. He had not expected refusal. Bruno moved between Mara and the doorway. His broad body blocked part of the red light, and his scarred left ear tilted toward the room while the rest of him faced the alley. Ethan stepped back. "All right," he said. "Your choice." He returned to the workbench and left the door open just wide enough for the dogs to see inside without feeling trapped. Outside, metal bowls touched concrete with a soft scrape. Mara did not eat at once. Through the glass, Ethan watched her lift her nose and test the air. Her ears flattened. She licked her lips once, then again, though there was no food in her mouth. When she finally approached the smaller bowl, she picked up a piece of meat and immediately dropped it into the snow. Bruno shifted sideways. The movement was subtle, almost casual, but it placed his shoulders between Mara and the room where the puppies lay. Only then did Mara lower her head and eat. She swallowed too quickly. Bruno barely touched his own food until she was finished. Within minutes, both dogs disappeared into the alley. Ethan closed the door and stood in the silence they left behind. He had spent enough time around fear to know it did not always look frightened. Sometimes it looked calm. Sometimes it followed instructions. Sometimes it finished breakfast before leaving. but he still believed Mara had given birth to the litter. There had to be an explanation. Exhaustion, shock, pain. Perhaps she had been separated from them long enough for the smell to change. Perhaps her body had simply shut down whatever instinct should have brought her through the door. He carried those explanations until Simone arrived 2 hours later and dismantled them one by one. She entered through the rear door with snow melting on the shoulders of her navy coat. Tessa followed, balancing a case of formula against her hip while complaining that the county plow had apparently been driven by a man with a personal grievance against roads. "How are they?" Simone asked. "4 feeding well. The smallest took less this morning." "Temperature?" 97.8 after warming." Tessa set down the case and glanced at him. "He writes everything down. It is unsettling." "I was told to." "Most men hear half an instruction and improve the rest beyond recognition." Ethan handed Simone the chart. She studied the numbers, then moved to the incubator. The 5 puppies shifted against one another, blind and helpless, their bodies seeking heat without knowing where it came from. "The small one is holding steady," Simone said. "That matters." Ethan looked toward the window. Mara came back. Simone's hands paused. "And?" She looked at them, then she ate and left. Tessa stopped opening a bottle of formula. Did she try to come inside? No. Did she vocalize? No. Posture? Ethan described what he had seen, the flattened ears, the stiff legs, the repeated licking, the food dropped into the snow. Simone listened without interrupting. "That does not sound like indifference," she said. "It looked like it." "Fear often does." She closed the incubator and removed her gloves. "Can you get her close enough for me to observe?" "Not if you bring a catch pole." "I did not ask to catch her." By late morning, the storm had weakened into a steady fall of fine snow. Ethan placed the bowls beneath the awning again, though Bruno and Mara rarely returned twice in the same day. Simone waited inside the darkened storage room with the light off. Tessa sat near the back wall, holding a thermal camera and muttering that crouching behind bags of stove pellets had not been included in her job description. They waited almost 40 minutes. Bruno appeared first at the mouth of the alley. He stopped immediately. His nose moved toward the building. His eyes narrowed at the unfamiliar car parked beside the shop. Mara remained behind the fir branches, barely visible. Ethan did not call them. He stepped outside, set down the bowls, and returned indoors. Bruno approached in stages. Mara followed only after he had inspected the threshold and the tires of Simone's vehicle. Simone watched through the narrow gap beside the storage room door. Mara's coat was damp along the belly. The fur clung close enough for Simone to study the shape of her body as she moved. Mara showed none of the physical changes expected in a dog that had given birth hours earlier. There was no swelling around the mammary glands, no altered gait, no tenderness in the abdomen. Her body temperature, read from a distance, was normal. Mara heard one of the puppies squeak. She froze. Her breathing quickened, but she did not turn toward the sound. Bruno stopped eating and leaned lightly against her shoulder. After several seconds, Mara backed away from the bowl. She did not run. She simply withdrew until the corner of the building hid the door from view. Bruno followed. Simone waited until they had vanished before stepping into the room. "She did not give birth," she said. Ethan stared at the empty bowls. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without examining her directly. Her body is not postpartum. She may have had litters before, but not this one." The words changed the room. Until then, the puppies had been an emergency with a missing mother. Now they were evidence of a decision. Someone had carried 5 newborn dogs through a snowstorm. Someone had chosen Ethan's truck. Someone had used his coat. Tessa broke the silence. Then the tracks were hers, because she found them before you did. Ethan looked toward the slush beneath the truck, the broad prints, the smaller ones circling twice, the dragged mark where Mara had slipped. She smelled them. Most likely. And left. Simone's expression remained thoughtful. She may not have left because she did not care. Ethan glanced at the incubator. Then why? I do not know yet. That answer bothered him more than a false certainty would have. Around noon, Tessa changed the towels beneath the puppies, while Ethan cleaned the feeding bottles. The smallest puppy had begun moving more, nosing blindly beneath its siblings in search of warmth. Tessa lifted the old canvas coat from the chair. This needs washing before anything lives in it again. It has already survived me. That is not the same as clean. She turned it over, checking the lining for dampness. Her fingers stopped near the inner seam. Ethan? He looked up. A line of dark thread ran beneath the pocket, newer than the faded stitching around it. It was short, uneven, and almost hidden by a fold in the canvas. That yours? Tessa asked. No. She laid the coat flat on the workbench. Ethan used a small blade to cut 2 stitches without damaging the fabric. Inside the lining was a narrow piece of paper wrapped in clear plastic. For several seconds, none of them touched it. Simone finally pulled on a fresh glove and removed the packet. The message had been written in blue ink, the letters uneven, as if the writer had been cold or afraid. Don't take them to Hollowgate Rescue. No explanation, no name, just the warning. Tessa read it twice. That is not vague. Simone looked toward Ethan. Who knew the coat belonged to you? It was missing before I found the litter. You said you had not seen it in weeks. I assumed I left it in the truck. But you did not? Ethan took the paper from her and studied the handwriting. The pressure changed from word to word. The final letters of rescue slanted downward, as if the writer had been forced to finish quickly. Hollowgate Rescue was not a suspicious name in Millstone Creek. It was painted on donation jars beside grocery registers. It appeared on banners during the church's winter fundraiser. Photographs of adopted dogs filled a large bulletin board outside the post office. The organization's white vans were as familiar as school buses and snowplows. Calder Voss, its director, had spoken at town meetings about compassion, responsibility, and the cost of doing good work in a small county. He knew how to hold a frightened dog for a photograph without wrinkling his shirt. He knew which stories would make people write checks. Ethan had repaired one of Hollowgate's generators the previous winter. Calder had paid on time. That fact now felt strangely useless. Could be someone with a grudge, Tessa said. Could be, Simone replied. It could also be someone who believed the warning mattered more than identifying themselves. Ethan folded the paper along its original crease and placed it in a clean plastic evidence sleeve from Simone's bag. We do not call Hollowgate. Not yet, Simone said. Tessa looked toward the puppies. The county will eventually need a report. I already filed that 5 dogs were found, Ethan said. Simone's gaze sharpened. Through whom? The Animal Services line. Tessa exhaled. Hollowgate has the county intake contract. Ethan understood before she finished. The report would not remain inside a neutral office. It would be routed to the organization named in the warning. At 1:30, the bell above the front door rang. A woman entered, carrying snow on the shoulders of a pale blue fleece jacket bearing the Hollowgate logo. She was in her mid-30s, slender, with light brown hair tied low at the back of her neck. Strands had escaped around a tired face, and the skin beneath her gray-blue eyes looked bruised by too little sleep. Ethan recognized her. Audrey? Audrey Finch worked the intake desk at Hollowgate and occasionally brought equipment to his shop for repair. She set a small box of electrical fuses on the counter. "Heater keeps tripping in the west kennel," she said. "Calder asked me to get replacements." Her voice was quiet and careful. Ethan reached for the box. From the rear room came a thin chorus of hungry squeaks. Audrey's hand slipped. The fuses struck the floor and scattered beneath the counter. She went completely still. The reaction lasted less than a second, but Ethan saw it. Her face lost color. Her eyes moved toward the rear door, then toward his coat, lying open on the workbench beyond it. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes." She crouched too quickly to gather the fuses. One rolled near Ethan's boot. He picked it up and held it out. Audrey avoided his hand. "Are those puppies?" "5. "Where did they come from?" "Under my truck." Her breathing changed. Ethan waited. People often filled silence when they believed someone else was willing to hold it. Audrey did not. She placed the fuses back in the box, left cash on the counter, and turned toward the door. "You forgot your change." "Keep it." "Audrey." She stopped but did not turn. Ethan considered showing her the warning. Instead, he asked, "Is there something I should know about Hollow Gate?" The room seemed to contract around the question. Audrey looked over her shoulder. Fear passed across her face so openly that for one moment it appeared almost like relief. Then it vanished. "No," she said. She left. Through the window, Ethan watched her cross the street without fastening her coat. She nearly slipped at the curb, but kept moving until the snow swallowed her beyond the diner. The phone rang at 3. The caller introduced herself as Phyllis Crane from the County Animal Services office. Her voice was brisk but friendly, the tone of someone accustomed to turning complicated situations into boxes on a form. Phyllis was 63 and had worked for the county long enough to remember when records were stored in metal cabinets instead of computer systems. Ethan knew her by sight, silver blonde hair set neatly around her face, reading glasses attached to a beaded chain, and an unfailing belief that properly completed paperwork could rescue almost any situation. "I am following up on the abandoned litter," she said. 5 German Shepherd puppies found at Rourke's Supply?" "That is right." "Mother present?" "No." "Immediate medical care?" "Dr. Whitcomb is supervising." "Excellent. I'll note temporary stabilization at the Discovery location." Ethan leaned against the counter. "Who receives this report?" There was a pause filled with keyboard clicks. "Because these are unidentified animals, intake notification goes to our contracted shelter." "Hollow Gate?" "Yes, they coordinate placement and custody once the animals can be safely transported." "Do not authorize a transfer." "I do not authorize transfers, Mr. Rourke. I route reports." "Then note that the animals remain here until the county reviews the case." Another pause. "I can add your objection, but the system automatically sends the intake notice." "When?" "It already has." Phyllis did not sound alarmed. To her, the system was working exactly as designed. That was what unsettled him. Less than an hour later, Bruno appeared beneath the rear awning. Mara followed. Ethan had just set down the bowls when Bruno's head lifted sharply. The dog turned toward Main Street before any engine was audible to Ethan. Then came the sound. A diesel motor idling unevenly. A brief metallic whine from a worn belt. Mara abandoned the food. She did not look toward the road. She moved instantly for the alley, body low, tail tucked so tightly it touched her belly. Bruno hesitated only long enough to place himself between her and the street. A white van rolled into view. Hollow Gate Rescue was printed on the side in blue letters beneath the image of an open gate and a red heart. The van stopped across from the shop. Calder Voss sat behind the wheel. At 57, he looked exactly like the man Millstone Creek trusted him to be. Steel gray hair combed neatly to one side, clean-shaven face, navy fleece vest zipped over a pale shirt. One hand rested lightly on the steering wheel. He did not get out. He looked past Ethan toward the rear of the store, toward the room where the puppies were being kept. Bruno retreated into the alley after Mara, but not before turning his scarred ear toward the van as if fixing the sound in memory. Calder remained there for nearly a minute. Then he drove away. The street became quiet again. From somewhere behind the building came the faint scrape of paws moving through wet brush. A puppy cried inside the shop. At the edge of the alley, Mara stopped. She looked back once, not at Ethan and not at the bowl she had left untouched. She looked toward the sound behind the red-lit window. Then she disappeared into the trees with the expression of a creature that had not forgotten the past, only how to survive it. By the third morning, the story of the puppies had traveled farther than Ethan had. Millstone Creek was small enough that news rarely moved in a straight line. It passed from the counter at Mabel's table to the pews of the white church, from the church to the hardware store, and from the hardware store to people who claimed they had heard it directly from someone involved. By breakfast, the 5 puppies had become 6. By lunch, Mara had supposedly carried them through the storm one at a time. By evening, someone insisted Bruno had stood guard against coyotes beneath Ethan's truck. None of it was true. Ethan found that almost comforting. Rumor meant the town was paying attention. It also meant he needed facts before attention hardened into certainty. He began at Mabel's table. The diner sat 2 doors down from his shop, its front windows fogged by coffee steam and the heat of the griddle. Mabel Henshaw moved between tables in her red and white apron, carrying 3 plates along one arm and correcting a customer's memory without slowing down. "I did not say Mara had puppies," she told an elderly man near the window. "I said puppies were found near Mara. Those are different sentences, Earl. They lead to the same place. Only if you are walking backward." She placed a cup of coffee in front of Ethan before he asked for one. "You look terrible," she said. "Good morning." That was the polite version. Ethan sat at the counter. He had slept 4 hours across 3 nights, enough to keep moving, but not enough to make the world feel properly attached at the edges. Mabel lowered her voice. "How are the little ones?" "Stable." "The small one?" "Back from Simone's clinic this morning." "That sounds like good news." "It is." She studied him, then glanced toward the other customers. "You did not come for coffee." "I need to know where Bruno and Mara came from." Mabel stopped wiping the counter. For the first time that morning, her expression lost its humor. "I thought somebody would eventually ask." She poured coffee into her own cup and leaned against the sink. "Judith Bellamy," she said. "That is where I saw them." The name meant little to Ethan. Mabel explained that Judith had lived beyond the northern edge of town, where the paved road narrowed into gravel and the fir trees grew close enough to scrape both sides of a pickup. She had been a widow for nearly 20 years and had turned part of her farm into a place for abandoned German shepherds. "Not one of those places with matching shirts and photographs every weekend," Mabel said. "Judith did the dull work, bathing, feeding?" "Sitting beside the ones that bit when someone touched the wrong place." "You saw Bruno and Mara there?" "More than once. Bruno rode in the truck bed like he owned the road. Mara used to sit behind the cab. Thin, even then, but not afraid of everyone." "Who else lived there?" "A female named Willow. Lighter coat, sweet face. Judith said Willow could calm down dogs that would not let humans near them." The name settled into Ethan's thoughts. Willow. Mabel looked toward the diner window, where snow slid in slow sheets from the awning. "Judith worked with Hollow Gate," she continued. "They handled adoptions. She handled the dogs nobody wanted to put in photographs." "What happened to her?" "Pneumonia, last winter." Mabel's thumb pressed against the rim of her cup. "She went into the hospital. Then Everett Mays told everyone she needed long-term care. The farm was closed before most of us understood she was not coming back. Everett? Managed her bills, taxes, land papers, the sort of man who says your first name too often when he wants you to trust him. And the dogs? Mabel shook her head. Hollowgate said they had been relocated. Where? That answer changed depending on who asked. Ethan let the silence sit. Mabel did not fill it with a joke. Bruno and Mara appeared behind my diner about 3 weeks later, she said. I put out meat. They would not come near while I was watching. Then they moved to your shop. Why mine? Maybe because you know how to leave things alone without abandoning them. The sentence stayed with Ethan after he left. He crossed Main Street as the church bell struck 9. Snow had thinned into a bright mist, leaving the sidewalks wet and reflective. At the corner near the post office, he found Wesley Pike clearing ice from a blue mailbox with the edge of a shovel. Wesley had carried mail through Millstone Creek for 38 years before retiring. He was 70, narrow through the shoulders, with a white mustache and the permanent forward lean of a man who had spent decades walking into weather. When Ethan mentioned Judith, Wesley rested both hands on the shovel. She wrote letters, he said. To whom? County offices, rescue associations, once to the State Veterinary Board. You remember that? I remember anyone who mailed certified envelopes every Tuesday for 6 weeks. What was in them? Was not my business. Wesley looked down the street before adding, but she stopped sending them before she got sick. Did you ever see Bruno and Mara at the farm? Bruno, Mara, Willow, several others. Judith knew everyone by name. He rubbed at the ice on his mustache. Last time I delivered there, a white hollow gate van was parked by the barn. 2 men were loading crates. Judith was standing on the porch arguing with someone. Calder Voss? Could not see his face. Heard her say, "They are not inventory." That was not proof. It was not even a complete memory, but it was the first thing Ethan had heard that carried the shape of conflict. Back at the shop, Tessa had taken over the rear room with the authority of someone who believed all available surfaces existed for medical organization. The smallest puppy had returned from the clinic in a padded carrier. Tessa had marked it on the chart as number 5, though she had drawn a tiny star beside the number. You named it, Ethan said. I did not. You drew a star. That is a medical symbol. For what? For stop asking questions. The puppy had gained less than an ounce, but its temperature was stable, and its suck reflex stronger. Tessa placed it beside the others, then watched until it found warmth among its siblings. Mabel arrived 10 minutes later, carrying soup, and announced that she would manage the front counter until noon. I can handle my own store, Ethan said. You can barely handle your own eyelids. I am awake. You are vertical. That is not the same thing. She tied a spare apron around her waist and began sorting customer tickets before Ethan could argue further. People came through the shop all morning with blankets, hot water bottles, bags of puppy formula, and offers to take one of the newborns home. Ethan thanked them and refused each offer. The puppies were not ready to leave veterinary supervision. More importantly, the warning inside the coat had changed what help meant. Until he understood who had placed them there and why Hollowgate had been named, every unknown home was another place they could disappear. Near noon, Deputy Jonah Sutter arrived without sirens or ceremony. He wore a tan county uniform beneath a dark brown patrol jacket. At 52, Jonah had a square, weathered face, a thick salt and pepper mustache, and pale blue eyes that seemed slow only because they preferred complete thoughts. He removed his hat and looked through the front window before approaching Ethan. You asked about Judith Bellamy. I asked whether she was still in the county. She is not. Jonah opened a thin folder on the counter. After Ethan had called the previous evening, Jonah had searched the county property records, hospital transfer documents, and public court filings. Judith had been admitted for pneumonia 11 months earlier. 2 weeks later, she had been transferred to a private care facility in Washington County. The transfer authorization carried the signature of Everett Mays. He had power of attorney? Ethan asked. He had a limited financial authorization, Jonah said, expired 7 months before the transfer. So he had no right to sign. Not for medical placement. Jonah turned another page. The capacity assessment is a copy. No original signature from the physician. No attached examination notes. Can you bring Judith back? No? The answer was firm, not dismissive. I can request a welfare review. I can notify Adult Protective Services. I cannot remove someone from a licensed facility because paperwork looks wrong. And the farm? Still in Judith's name. Everett is listed as property manager. There is a pending application to rezone part of it for commercial storage. Ethan looked up. Who filed it? Everett. Mabel, standing within earshot, muttered something unkind about men with leather briefcases. Jonah closed the folder. These irregularities justify a review. They do not prove Hollowgate stole dogs, forged adoptions, or placed those puppies under your truck. I did not say they did. You were thinking it loudly. Jonah tucked the folder under one arm. I will keep looking. You keep the puppies medically documented. Do not trespass on Bellamy's property. Do not confront Calder. You rehearsed that last part. I have met men who believe calm means permission. Ethan respected Jonah more for saying it plainly. That afternoon, Simone returned to check the litter. While Tessa weighed each puppy, Ethan told her what he had learned about Judith, Willow, and the disappearing dogs. Simone listened, then glanced toward the back door. Bruno and Mara have not returned? Not since yesterday. Try the blanket. Ethan frowned. What blanket? One carrying the puppy's scent. Place it near the bowls, not inside the shelter. Give them room to choose. He selected a small fleece cloth from the incubator and laid it several feet from the food. They waited inside. Bruno appeared near dusk. The dog did not go to the bowl first. He walked directly to the fleece, lowered his head, and inhaled once. His body changed, not dramatically. He did not bark or recoil. His neck stiffened beneath the thick fur, and his tail lowered until it nearly touched the ground. Mara emerged behind him. Bruno stepped across the blanket. The position placed his entire body between Mara and the scent. Mara tried to look around him. Bruno shifted again. What is he doing? Ethan asked. Creating distance, Simone said. For her? Possibly for both of them. Mara took one step forward. Her nose reached the edge of Bruno's shoulder. She caught the scent from the blanket and stopped so abruptly that her front paw remained lifted above the snow. Then came the sound of number 5 crying inside the rear room. It was longer than the usual hungry squeaks, a thin, wavering call that carried through the closed glass. Mara's lifted paw began to tremble. She backed away, not toward the forest, toward the wall. Her body lowered until her stomach nearly touched the snow. Simone's voice remained quiet. This is conditioned avoidance. Ethan looked at her. She knows the smell. She recognizes something connected to it. That does not mean she understands whose puppies they are. Why would a litter frighten her? Simone watched Mara carefully. Imagine that every time puppies cried, people came with ropes. Every time a mother approached them, she was restrained. Every time dogs gathered around an enclosure, a van arrived, and one of them disappeared. Ethan's jaw tightened. You think that happened? I think her body expects it to happen. There was a difference, and Ethan understood why Simone insisted on it. Bruno leaned against Mara until she put her raised paw down. Neither dog ate. For several seconds, they stood beside the untouched bowls, facing in opposite directions, Bruno toward the street, Mara toward the room. Then number 5 cried again. Something in Mara broke loose. She darted past Bruno. Ethan moved instinctively, but stopped himself before touching the door. Mara ran to the back window and pressed her nose against the glass. Inside, the smallest puppy squirmed alone at the edge of the bedding, separated from the warmth of the others. Mara released a low sound. It was not a bark. It was barely louder than breath, but it carried a tenderness so immediate that Ethan felt it in the center of his chest. For one moment, Mara forgot to be afraid. Her eyes followed the puppy as Tessa reached into the incubator and returned it to the litter. Then a diesel engine sounded at the far end of Main Street. The uneven idle arrived first. A second later came the sharp metallic whine of a worn belt. Mara tore herself away from the glass. She tried to retreat too quickly, lost her footing in the wet snow, and struck one hip against the wall. Bruno reached her before she could rise fully, pressing his shoulder beneath her chest. The white hollow gate van turned onto Main Street. It did not stop at Ethan's shop this time. It continued toward the church, where donation banners still hung from the previous month's fundraiser. But the sound alone was enough. Mara struggled toward the alley. Bruno stayed against her, using his body to guide rather than force. Together they disappeared behind the stacked tires and into the trees. Ethan stood between the window and the street. Inside, 5 puppies shifted beneath the red light. Outside, the van's engine faded into the distance. The connection was no longer an idea. Mara had approached when the puppy cried. She had fled when Hollow Gate came near. Not because she had reasoned through a threat, not because she had chosen to hide affection. Because somewhere in her past, those two sounds had learned to belong together. Ethan looked at the place where her nose had fogged the glass. A pale oval remained for a few seconds before the cold erased it. Bruno and Mara had not forgotten how to care. They had learned that caring was the moment before someone came to take it away. By 10 in the morning, Rourke's supply and repair was crowded enough that Ethan could no longer hear the small clock above the parts cabinet. Snow had stopped during the night, leaving Millstone Creek unnaturally bright. Sunlight reflected off the wet roofs and the plowed ridges along Main Street, filling the shop windows with a white glare. Inside, boots tracked slush across the wooden floor. Mrs. Dooley waited beside the counter for Ethan to explain why her furnace kept shutting down. A logging contractor needed a replacement belt for a generator. Mabel had arrived with a pot of stew and immediately begun telling customers not to lean against the door leading to the rear room. Behind that door, 5 puppies slept beneath steady heat. Bruno and Mara had not appeared for breakfast. Ethan noticed their absence every few minutes and disliked himself for it. He was fitting a new valve onto Mrs. Dooley's heater when the bell over the front entrance rang. Conversation thinned. Calder Voss entered carrying a blue document folder. He wore a pale button-down shirt beneath a Navy Hollowgate fleece vest, as if he had dressed for a photograph about responsible leadership. His steel-gray hair was combed neatly to one side. Snow had not touched his polished brown shoes. A younger Hollowgate employee followed him, a broad-faced man named Dennis Holt, whom Ethan had seen driving the rescue van. Behind Dennis came a woman in a county-issued gray coat, holding a tablet close to her chest. She looked uncomfortable before anyone spoke. Calder smiled at the room. "Morning, Ethan." Ethan set down the wrench. "Calder, I hope we can make this simple." Simple things usually arrive without witnesses. Calder's smile remained in place. He introduced the county representative as Lenora Beck, an administrative liaison from Animal Services. Lenora was in her early 40s with dark curls pinned beneath a wool cap and the wary posture of someone who had expected to verify a routine transfer, not enter a room full of people suddenly pretending not to listen. "I'm only here to document custody," she said. "That may be difficult," Ethan replied. "No custody has been agreed to." Calder placed the folder on the counter. "These animals were reported as abandoned newborns without a known owner. Hollow Gate is the contracted intake provider for the county. We have neonatal equipment, trained personnel, and appropriate isolation space." "So does Dr. Whitcomb." "Dr. Whitcomb is supervising temporary stabilization. That is not the same as authorized shelter placement." The wording was polished. Each sentence arrived without visible aggression, which made it easier for someone unfamiliar with the situation to mistake certainty for authority. Mabel stood beside the stew pot with both hands on her hips. "They are alive, warm, and gaining weight." Calder turned toward her with patient concern. "Which is good news. It is also why they should be moved before complications develop." Ethan opened the folder. The first page classified the puppies as unidentified animals under emergency medical risk. The second authorized transfer from Rourke Supply and Repair to Hollow Gate. The third contained a typed statement that Ethan Rourke had consented by telephone. He read the time beside the statement. Tuesday, 2:14 p.m. At that hour, Tessa had been weighing number 5, while Ethan held the formula bottle. His phone had been on the workbench, visible to both of them. He looked at Calder. "Who spoke with me?" Calder glanced at the page. "Our intake staff recorded verbal authorization." "What did I say?" "Your agreement is summarized there." "It says I agreed. It does not say what I said." Calder's fingers pressed lightly against the folder's edge. "This is standard administrative language." "No, it is a claim." Lenora shifted her tablet. "Mr. Rourke, are you stating that you did not provide verbal consent?" "I am stating I never spoke with Hollow Gate." The room changed. Until that moment, the dispute could still have been mistaken for differing opinions about care. Now there was a specific falsehood on paper. Dennis glanced at Calder. Calder did not look back. "These situations become confused," he said. "Calls are routed through multiple offices." "Then show me the call record." "That can be reviewed later. The animals should not remain in a repair shop while paperwork is debated." "Mrs.?" Dooley, who had been silent until then, moved one hand protectively toward her heater. "This shop is cleaner than my kitchen." Mabel nodded. "That is because nobody lets Ethan cook." A few customers laughed. Calder did not. He turned slightly so his voice carried beyond the counter. "No one is questioning Mr. Rourke's intentions. He has clearly become invested in these animals. But goodwill is not training. A retired serviceman with a heat lamp and feeding chart is not a neonatal rescue facility." Ethan felt the sentence find its intended place, not in his anger, in the space between how Millstone Creek treated him and how it saw him. People trusted Ethan with their generators, their furnaces, their trucks, and the keys to houses where elderly parents lived alone. Yet he had also noticed the hesitation when a loud sound made him go still. He knew how conversations softened when someone mentioned the Navy. He knew the relief in people's faces when he said he was fine. Calder was not accusing him of cruelty. He was suggesting instability with enough politeness that others could complete the thought for him. Ethan closed the folder. "Dr. Whitcomb is on her way." Calder's expression cooled by a degree. "We are not required to wait." "You are if you want those dogs to leave without breaking the law." The front bell rang again. Simone entered first, her navy coat open over deep teal scrubs. Tessa followed, carrying the puppy's medical chart beneath one arm. Jonah Sutter came in behind them, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. Calder looked at Jonah. "This is a civil transfer." "Then it should survive civil review," Jonah said. Simone took the folder from Ethan and began reading without greeting Calder. Tessa leaned over her shoulder. For almost a minute, the only sounds were the radiator, the drip of melting snow, and a puppy squeaking faintly in the rear room. Simone tapped the second page. This health designation references a vaccination file. Calder folded his arms. Standard intake preparation. The litter is less than a week old. Yes. The vaccine lot number listed here was entered into county inventory 6 weeks before these puppies were born. Lenora looked up from her tablet. That could be a template field. It could, Simone said, but a medical urgency form should not contain invented preventive care. Tessa pointed lower on the page. This version of the neonatal transfer form was retired in September. Dennis shifted his weight again. Calder's voice remained level. Administrative errors do not change the fact that Hollow Gate is equipped to care for these animals. No, Ethan said. They change whether you had the right to take them. Jonah held out his hand for the folder. He read the authorization page, then looked at Lenora. Does your office have a signed county transfer order? Lenora scrolled through her tablet. I have an intake notification and a contractor request. That is not an order. No. Any emergency seizure authorization? No. Any consent from the property holder? She glanced at Ethan, apparently disputed. Jonah closed the folder. Then the puppies remain where they are until Animal Services verifies custody. Calder's face did not harden. That would have been easier to trust. Instead, he gave a small, saddened sigh. This is what happens when emotion overtakes procedure. Ethan watched him smooth the edge of one page with his thumb. Calder looked around the shop. I understand why people admire Mr. Rourke. Service carries a certain moral authority in a town like this, but military experience does not make someone qualified for every crisis. Ethan felt Mabel turn toward him. He also felt the old impulse to say nothing. Silence had served him well for years. It kept people from asking questions he did not want to answer. It kept anger from becoming spectacle. It allowed others to reveal more than they intended. But silence could also leave the room to whoever spoke most smoothly. Ethan stepped out from behind the counter. You are right about one thing, he said. Calder waited. This is not about whether I am a veteran. His voice was quiet, but the shop had become so still that no one missed a word. It is not about whether I care more than you do. It is not even about whether this building looks like the kind of place people expect puppies to survive. He placed one hand on the blue folder. It is about why a rescue organization needs a false phone call, an outdated form, and a medical record created before the animals were born. Calder opened his mouth. Ethan continued. If Hollow Gate is the safest place for them, prove it without lying. The statement did not sound heroic. It sounded like a repair diagnosis. Something had failed. Ethan had named the broken part. Lenora lowered her tablet. Dennis stared at the floor. From the rear room came the soft rustle of the litter shifting beneath the heat lamp. Calder gathered the papers into his folder. I will return with proper authorization. Jonah stepped aside from the door. You are welcome to request it. Calder looked once toward the back of the shop, not at Ethan, at the room beyond him. Then he left. Dennis followed quickly. Lenora remained for several seconds, entered a note into her tablet, and apologized to no one in particular before stepping outside. The customers began speaking all at once. Mabel raised one hand. Everybody stop helping. Surprisingly, they did. Ethan returned to Mrs. Dooley's heater. His hands were steady, but the muscles beneath his shoulders had tightened until the combat shirt pulled across his back. Mrs. Dooley touched his sleeve. You do not need to prove you are safe to us, she said. Ethan looked at her. The kindness in the sentence unsettled him more than Calder's accusation. I know, he said. He was not entirely certain that he did. Outside, Calder crossed toward the Hollow Gate van. The street had filled with people drawn from the diner, the hardware store, and the church office. They stood in small groups, watching with the open curiosity of a town that had just discovered one of its trusted stories might have a loose seam. The van's engine started. That sound reached the alley. Bruno appeared between two buildings. Ethan saw him through the front window and set down his wrench. The German Shepherd did not move toward the rear awning. He walked onto Main Street. Someone gasped. Bruno continued until he stood directly in front of the white van. He did not bark. His lips remained relaxed over his teeth. His body was rigid, broad chest facing the grill, scarred left ear angled toward the engine. Calder tapped the horn once. Bruno did not move. "Do not do that again," Jonah called from the sidewalk. Calder lowered the window. "Then remove the animal." "He is not attacking you. He is obstructing a vehicle." Ethan stepped outside but did not call Bruno. For months Bruno had accepted food only after Ethan retreated. He had refused touch, shelter, and every invitation that might close the distance between them. Now he had chosen his position. At the side of the shop, Mara emerged from the alley. She did not join Bruno. Instead, she crossed the wet sidewalk toward the rear window. Her body stayed low. Every few steps she stopped, listening to the van's uneven idle. Behind the glass, number 5 had begun to cry. Mara reached the window. She pressed her nose against it. Calder opened the van door. Mara flinched so hard that her hind legs nearly folded. But she did not run. Her eyes remained fixed on the red-lit room. Bruno turned his head toward the sound of the door, shifting his body so that he stood between Calder and Mara. The people along Main Street saw it. They saw the dog blocking the van without aggression. They saw the smaller dog trembling beside the puppy's window. They saw Calder Voss standing beside a vehicle both animals feared more than traffic, strangers, or winter. No one said what it meant. They did not need to. Calder got back into the van. The street was too narrow to turn around with Bruno in front of him. He reversed slowly, tires whispering over slush, until he reached the intersection. Then he backed into the side road and drove away in the opposite direction. Bruno watched until the engine faded. Only then did he leave the middle of the street. He crossed to the shop and lay down beneath the front awning rather than returning to the hidden shelter behind the building. Mara remained at the rear window. Ethan did not approach either of them. That evening, the town emptied from Main Street one light at a time. Mabel carried the empty stew pot back to the diner. Jonah took the disputed documents to the county office. Simone and Tessa completed the final feeding check before leaving. Ethan locked the front door. Bruno still lay beneath the awning, his dark and gold coat visible beneath the porch light. Around the side of the building, Mara had curled against the exterior wall of the rear room. Only a pane of glass and a few feet of floor separated her from the incubator. Ethan opened the back door 6 inches and placed water near the threshold. Neither dog entered. He did not ask them to. He returned to the folding chair beside the puppies and switched off the overhead light. The room settled into the low red glow of the heat lamp. Outside, Bruno released a slow breath. A few moments later, Mara answered with one of her own. Ethan sat between those sounds and the soft breathing of the litter. For months the dogs had survived by keeping distance around themselves like a fence. That night the fence remained, but for the first time they had chosen to sleep against it rather than beyond it. The knock came close to midnight. 3 quick taps against the rear door, followed by a pause long enough to suggest the person outside had already reconsidered being there. Ethan looked up from the feeding chart. The puppies had settled after their last bottle. 5 small bodies rested beneath the incubator's muted glow, their breathing soft and uneven in the ordinary way of newborn things. Beyond the wall, Bruno lay under the awning. Mara had taken her place beside the rear window again, close enough to hear the litter, but not close enough to be enclosed. The knock came once more. Ethan crossed the room without turning on the overhead light. "Who is it?" "Audrey." Her voice barely carried through the wood. He opened the door only halfway. Audrey Finch stood in the snow wearing a blue-gray raincoat over an oatmeal sweater. Her light brown hair had come loose from its tie, and wet strands clung to her cheeks. A rust-colored scarf was wound tightly around her throat. Mud darkened the cuffs of her jeans and both boots. She held nothing in her hands. That made Ethan more cautious than if she had arrived with a weapon. "What happened?" he asked. "I need to come inside." Mara rose from beside the wall. The movement was silent, but Audrey saw it. Her eyes moved toward the sable dog and immediately lowered. "I won't touch her," Audrey said. Ethan stepped aside. Audrey entered the rear room and stopped beneath the combat shirt hanging from the back of his folding chair. The coat that had held the puppies lay folded on the workbench, its lining still open where Ethan had removed the warning. She stared at it for several seconds. "That was yours," she said. "I know. You gave it to me." The memory returned slowly. 3 weeks earlier, Audrey's sedan had died on the northern road during a hard rain. Ethan had found her standing beside the raised hood, soaked through and trying to restart an engine that had no interest in cooperating. He had replaced a cracked battery cable and refused payment after seeing the hollow gate identification card clipped to her belt. She had been shivering when he handed her the canvas coat from behind his truck seat. He had forgotten about it before reaching town. "You never brought it back," he said. "I was going to." "But you used it instead." Audrey looked toward the incubator. One of the puppies shifted beneath the blanket. "Yes." The word left her without defense. Ethan pulled the folding chair away from the wall, but did not offer it. Audrey sat only after her knees, seemed unable to support her. "I put them under your truck," she said. Outside, Bruno lifted his head. Ethan remained standing. "When?" "About 20 minutes before you opened the store." "The warming pack?" "From the neonatal cabinet." "You knew how long it would last?" "Not exactly. Long enough, I hoped." "You hoped?" Audrey closed her eyes. "I knew you opened before 6. I watched your lights for 4 mornings to be sure." There was calculation in the admission, but not cruelty. She had been afraid enough to build a plan from habits, weather, and the kindness of a man who had once repaired her car without asking why she looked exhausted. Ethan leaned against the workbench. "Who is the mother?" Audrey swallowed. "Willow." The name changed Mara's posture outside the glass. The dog's ears shifted forward. Audrey noticed. "She remembers it?" she whispered. "You know Bruno and Mara?" "I fed them at Judith Bellamy's farm." Mara moved one step closer to the window. Audrey did not turn toward her again. She spoke to Ethan instead. "Willow belonged to Judith, too. Pale gold chest, black saddle, honey-colored eyes. She was gentle with every dog Hollow Gate brought to the farm, even the ones that snapped at people." "Where is she?" "At Hollow Gate." "Front kennels?" "No." Audrey's hands tightened around each other. "There are buildings behind the public shelter, the old equipment sheds on the west side. Calder says they are quarantine spaces." "And what are they?" "Whatever he needs them to be." She told the story without drama, which made it harder to hear. After Judith became ill, Hollow Gate took control of the dogs under the claim that the farm could no longer meet county standards. The younger, healthier animals were cataloged first. Dogs with desirable coats, stable temperaments, or breeding histories received new identification numbers. Some were photographed as rescues. Some disappeared before photographs were ever taken. Willow had been kept because she was healthy and unusually calm. Calder said she was useful, Audrey said. Ethan's expression did not change. Useful how? For litters. The word settled heavily in the room. Audrey looked at the puppies. When she gave birth, he told us the puppies would be transferred out of state. No adoption screening, no public listing, just a pickup after midnight. And the donation campaign? Audrey nodded. They already had photos of another litter. Similar markings. They were going to post that Willow and her puppies needed emergency support, then record these 5 as adopted through addresses that don't exist. How long has this been happening? I don't know. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one I have. For the first time, Audrey looked directly at him. I knew records were wrong. I knew dogs disappeared. I kept telling myself there were explanations I didn't understand. And when did you stop telling yourself that? When I found Willow trying to push food through the bars toward a kennel that was already empty. Audrey's voice broke on the final word. She pressed both palms against her knees until they steadied. A litter had been taken that morning, not hers. She still smelled them. She kept carrying food to where they had been. The rearmost puppy stirred and released a short cry. Mara lowered herself beside the window. Ethan watched the dog before returning his attention to Audrey. You could have gone to the police. I tried to report it. To Jonah? Anonymously through the county complaint address. What happened? The message came back to Hollow Gate. Ethan frowned. Audrey explained that the county's rescue contract routed animal welfare complaints through the same shared intake system Hollowgate helped administer. Calder printed the complaint during a staff meeting and asked who had written it. No one answered. A kennel worker named Eric Danner questioned missing medication records 2 months later. By the end of the week, Calder accused him of stealing controlled veterinary supplies. Eric lost his job, his certification review was opened, and no other employee spoke up. My mother lives with me, Audrey said. She needs oxygen equipment. My insurance covers most of it. The words were not offered as an excuse. Audrey seemed to know excuses would make her smaller in Ethan's eyes. I chose my job, she said, again and again. You chose fear. That sounds kinder. It wasn't meant to. Audrey accepted that. Outside, snow slid from the awning with a soft collapse. Bruno stood, checked the alley, then lay down again. Ethan looked toward the coat. Why bring the puppies here? Because you never tried to catch Bruno or Mara. That was enough? No. Audrey glanced toward the front of the shop. You fixed my car. You gave me that coat. You didn't ask for money, and you didn't ask why I had Hollowgate scratches all over my hands. I assumed dogs. They were from a kennel latch. She took a slow breath. I thought if I left the puppies with someone who believed rescuing didn't mean owning, Calder might not get them back quietly. Why the note? Because I knew the county report would reach him. Then why leave the puppies somewhere that would require a county report? Because every other place I could think of was connected to Hollow Gate. There it was, not a clever plan, but a desperate one built inside a system with too few doors. Audrey reached inside her coat and removed a thin plastic envelope. Ethan did not take it immediately. What is that? Not enough. Inside were printed photographs, copied schedules, and several pages of handwritten notes. The photographs showed rows of chain-link kennels behind corrugated walls. The dates had been written on the backs. One image showed Willow standing inside a narrow enclosure, ribs beginning to show beneath her coat. Another showed a white transport van backed against a loading gate after midnight. The copied schedule listed identification numbers instead of names. Several entries had the word transfer beside them, but no destination. Audrey had also copied adoption addresses from the Hollowgate database. 3 belonged to vacant lots. 1 was a closed laundromat in Salem. 2 used the same rural mailbox under different family names. Ethan studied each page. "Did you take these from Calder's office?" "Some, others from intake." "Can he prove you accessed them?" "Yes." "You understand what happens if this does not lead anywhere?" "I lose my job." "That is the smallest thing that could happen." "I know." Ethan believed she did. At 1 in the morning, he called Jonah. The deputy arrived 25 minutes later in jeans, a navy gray flannel shirt, and a brown vest thrown over it. His salt and pepper mustache looked slightly uneven from sleep. He listened to Audrey's statement without interrupting. Then he arranged the documents across Ethan's counter. "These photographs show poor conditions," Jonah said. "Calder will call them temporary quarantine." "They are not," Audrey replied. "I believe you. Belief and probable cause are not the same thing." He held up the transport schedule. "These codes could refer to supplies. The addresses may be clerical errors. The altered IDs could be data migration." Audrey's face fell. Jonah continued before she could speak. "None of that means this is useless. It means we need independent pieces that point in the same direction." Ethan looked at the image of the West Sheds. "I have been inside that utility room." Both of them turned toward him. "Hollowgate's generator failed last winter," Ethan said. "Calder told me the West building was empty storage." He crossed to the old filing cabinet beside the parts shelves and pulled out a repair ledger. Ethan kept paper records because software updates had once erased 6 months of customer notes, and he did not forgive machines for carelessness any more easily than people. He found the entry. Hollowgate. West Auxiliary Unit. The generator fed 2 ventilation fans, 4 electric wall heaters, and a heat control circuit rated far beyond what an empty equipment shed required. Ethan had written down the serial numbers because 1 fan motor needed replacement. Jonah read the page twice. "That supports occupied space." "It supports heated and ventilated space," Ethan corrected, "not what was inside." "Good. Keep making that distinction." They moved to the security monitor. The camera behind Ethan's shop stored several weeks of footage. Hollowgate's van appeared on different nights, passing through the alley road at hours inconsistent with public intake. Ethan copied the clips while Jonah recorded dates and plate numbers. At 2:30, Mabel answered her phone with language that suggested friendship had limits before dawn. Yet she arrived 15 minutes later, wearing a wine-red coat over her nightdress and carrying a thermos. "I assume this is either important or you have all lost your minds," she said. "Both remain possible," Jonah replied. Mabel knew the driver who delivered bulk animal feed throughout the county. She called him from Ethan's office and put the conversation on speaker. The driver remembered Hollowgate because its monthly orders were unusually large for the number of dogs listed on its public board. Deliveries were often directed to the West Gate rather than the main shelter. Jonah documented his name and arranged a formal interview. By 4, the workbench held no single piece of decisive proof. Instead, it held a pattern: photographs, false addresses, transport schedules, electrical demand, night traffic, excess food, a mother dog hidden from public records. Jonah called the care facility where Judith Bellamy had been placed. A night supervisor initially refused to discuss any resident information, but agreed to deliver a request for direct contact after Jonah explained that it concerned a possible financial exploitation inquiry. They waited. At 5, the phone rang. Judith's voice was thinner than Ethan expected, but not confused. "Who is this?" "Deputy Jonah Sutter, ma'am. Dr. Simone Whitcomb and Ethan Rourke are here as witnesses." There was a pause. "Ethan Rourke," Judith repeated. "The repairman feeding my dogs." Ethan looked toward Bruno and Mara outside. "You know about that?" "Mabel told Wesley. Wesley wrote to me before Everett began redirecting my mail." Her mind was clear enough to carry humor. Jonah asked whether she had transferred ownership of the farm or her dogs to Hollowgate. "No." "Did you authorize Everett Mays to do so?" "No." "Everett had limited authority to pay taxes and utilities while I was hospitalized." "Did you agree to permanent residential care?" "I agreed to rehabilitation after pneumonia. Then I was told a doctor had declared me incapable of returning home." "Were you examined by that doctor?" "Not that I remember." Judith's answer was careful, not theatrical. Then she said, "I kept records." The facility staff brought her a small notebook with a worn blue cover. Judith had written dog names, dates, transport numbers, and fragments of conversations across blank spaces in old books when paper was not available. "Willow?" Ethan asked. Judith went quiet. "She was still at the farm when I left." "Her puppies are here." The line remained silent long enough that Ethan thought the call had dropped. "How many?" "5. "And Willow?" "We are trying to find her." Judith exhaled shakily. Then Bruno and Mara were right to run. The call ended with Jonah arranging a formal welfare interview and requesting that Judith's communication no longer be routed through Everett. Dawn had begun whitening the rear window. Audrey sat with both hands wrapped around Mabel's thermos cup. She looked smaller than when she arrived, but less hidden. Tessa brought a clean fleece blanket from the clinic shortly after 6. It had been placed beneath Willow during a previous examination months earlier and later, stored with her labeled belongings when Hollowgate refused to collect them. Simone had remembered it after hearing Audrey's account. Ethan carried the blanket outside. Bruno approached first. He lowered his nose to the fabric. A sound came from him so deep it seemed to rise from beneath his ribs. Mara stopped several feet away. She caught the scent. Her legs folded. She lay flat in the snow, head stretched forward, ears pressed back. She did not approach the food. She did not look at Ethan. The blanket was not evidence a court could use, but it told the truth in the only language Mara possessed. Willow was not merely a name from Judith's past. She belonged to the part of Bruno and Mara that still hurt. The sun was lifting weakly above Millstone Creek when Jonah prepared to leave for the county office. He had enough to request records, contact state animal welfare investigators, and pursue a judicial review of the West buildings. Not enough yet for a raid. Not enough to promise Willow would be found. Ethan opened the passenger door of his pickup. He intended only to move the truck closer to the shop before the road iced again. Bruno rose from beneath the awning. Without waiting for food or invitation, the German Shepherd walked across the snow and jumped into the cabin. He settled on the passenger floor, broad shoulders filling the space, scarred ear turned toward Ethan. No one spoke. Mara stood beside the rear wall. She looked at Bruno inside the truck, then at the red window where the puppies slept. The old fear returned to her posture. One ear tilted sideways, her weight shifted toward the alley. Ethan did not call her. He rested one hand on the open door and waited. Mara remained in the snow long enough for Audrey to lower her eyes and for Mabel to stop breathing loudly behind him. Then the sable dog ran forward. She placed her front paws on the truck's floor, hesitated once, and climbed in beside Bruno. Neither dog looked comfortable. Neither tried to get out. Ethan closed the door gently. They were not offering to solve the case. They were not leading him toward a hidden building as if memory were a map. They were doing something far more difficult. They were agreeing to return to the place where fear had taught them to leave. The Bellamy farm looked innocent beneath snow. Its fences shone white in the early light. Frost silvered the roof of the old barn, and the narrow farmhouse stood quietly among the firs as if Judith Bellamy might open the door at any moment and call the dogs in from the cold. Nothing about the place suggested missing records, false transfers, or animals whose names had been replaced by numbers. That was what troubled Ethan most. Cruelty rarely looked dramatic after enough time had passed. It settled into ordinary wood, empty bowls, and doors no one remembered closing. Jonah parked near the gate but left the county vehicle outside the property line. He had obtained written permission from Judith, witnessed by the care facility, and forwarded to the county that morning. It allowed them to enter the farm, inspect structures belonging to her, and document anything relevant to the suspected misuse of her property. It did not permit them to enter Hollow Gate. Not yet. Simone stepped out with a medical bag over one shoulder. Audrey remained near the passenger door, staring at the house. She had worked on the farm during Hollow Gate transfers, but had not returned since Judith was taken away. Bruno stood in the open bed of Ethan's pickup, front paws braced against the side. Mara remained inside the cab. She had climbed into the vehicle voluntarily, but the journey had cost her. Her body stayed low against the seat, and her eyes followed every bend in the forest road. When Ethan opened the door, she did not move. Bruno jumped down. He landed in the snow and stood motionless. For several seconds, he simply breathed. Then he walked through the open gate. No one followed immediately. Ethan gave him the distance he had always respected. Bruno crossed the yard toward an old stone water trough. Snow had filled it nearly to the rim. The dog placed his front paws against its edge and looked inside as though expecting water, or perhaps a reflection from another winter. His tail moved once, not a wag, a recognition. Mara finally stepped from the truck. She did not follow Bruno's path. She circled wide, keeping the house between herself and the barn. The pale patch near her front paw flashed against the snow each time she lifted it. Audrey watched her. "She used to sleep beneath Judith's porch," she said. "Willow slept in the kitchen. Bruno chose the barn door because he could see the road." Ethan looked toward Bruno. The dog had already taken position facing the gate. Even memory had assigned him a post. Jonah photographed the property before they disturbed anything. Fence lines, tire tracks, window locks, the broken seal on the equipment shed. He moved with deliberate patience, using his fountain pen to mark times in a small notebook. "We document first," he said. "Then we interpret." Audrey nodded, though he had not spoken directly to her. The farmhouse door remained locked. Judith had provided the location of a spare key beneath a loose brick beside the steps, but Jonah decided they would inspect the exterior structures first. "The barn," Judith had told them over the phone. "Start where the dog slept. Men hide papers in offices. They hide habits where they work." Bruno led no one. He merely moved through places he knew. At the bent section of fence, he stopped and pressed his nose to the wood. Rust stained the wire where it had been repaired repeatedly. Beyond it, a narrow path disappeared between fir trees toward the back of the property. Mara avoided the fence. She moved toward the smaller equipment shed and froze 10 feet from the door. Long scratches marked the lower planks. Some were old and gray, others cut deeper, protected from weather beneath the overhang. Simone crouched, but did not touch them. "Large dogs," she said. "More than one." Audrey looked at the marks. This was not equipment storage. "No," Ethan said. The padlock had been removed, but the door had swollen in its frame. Ethan braced one hand against the wood and pulled until the seal broke with a dull crack. Mara backed away instantly. Bruno left the water trough and came to stand beside her. Inside, the shed smelled of dust, mouse droppings, old straw, and something faintly medicinal. Empty hooks ran along one wall. Several sections of chain lay in a plastic bin. A rusted floor drain sat beneath a shelf. No dogs remained. Yet the building still held the shape of confinement. Audrey covered her mouth with one hand. "I brought food here," she said. "Calder told me the dogs were quarantined before transport." "How many?" Jonah asked. "I never saw more than 6 at once." "Did you record their names?" "They were codes by then." Jonah wrote that down. Ethan examined the rear wall. A newer electrical conduit ran along the beams, disappearing through a hole near the floor. It did not match the older wiring inside the shed. He followed it to a narrow maintenance panel. The control unit behind it was familiar. "I installed this model at Hollow Gate," he said. Jonah moved closer. "The same unit? Same manufacturer, same ventilation controller. Could it have been purchased separately?" "Yes." Ethan pointed at the handwritten calibration marks inside the panel. "But those are mine." The pencil strokes were small and angled. A date, a fan setting, the initials ER beside a replacement relay number. He remembered the repair. Calder had brought the controller to Ethan's shop instead of allowing him into the West Building. He said the storage shed needed better ventilation to prevent mold. Ethan had believed him because empty buildings also needed air. He had repaired the device, written the settings, and sent it back. Now it sat on Judith's property, connected to wiring that ran beneath the back wall. Jonah photographed the marks. "Where does the conduit go?" They stepped outside. The line continued underground toward the rear of the property. Snow had sunk slightly above it, forming a shallow seam leading past the barn toward the timber road. Audrey pointed through the trees. "That road connects with Hollow Gate's west entrance." "You are certain?" Jonah asked. "I rode in the feed truck twice. We used it when Calder didn't want animals unloaded near the public kennels." The road did not appear on Hollow Gate's registered operations map. It crossed a narrow strip of leased timberland before reaching the rescue property from behind. Ethan walked into the barn. Old stalls lined both sides. Names had been written above some doors in Judith's hand, faded but still legible. Bruno, Mara, Willow. Bruno entered behind him. The dog stopped beneath his own name. Ethan felt the moment without needing to touch him. Across the aisle, Mara stood outside Willow's stall. She lowered her head, sniffed the threshold, then moved toward a warped plank near the rear corner. Her paw scraped once at the floor. Then she retreated. Ethan crouched and lifted the loose board. Beneath it lay a worn leather collar. The brass tag was scratched, but readable. Willow Bellamy. Audrey made a small sound behind him. Ethan lifted the collar carefully. A few strands of pale golden fur remained caught beneath the buckle. Mara saw it. She did not come closer. Her body lowered until she sat in the straw, eyes fixed on the collar in Ethan's hand. For the first time that morning, Bruno abandoned his watch position. He crossed the aisle and sat beside her. The gesture changed nothing legally. It changed the room. Jonah looked at the tag, the hidden collar, and the names above the stalls. "This, combined with Judith's ownership records, confirms Willow was kept here," he said. "It still does not prove she is currently at Hollow Gate." Ethan stood. "No." He looked toward the electrical line leading into the forest. "But it tells us which questions to ask." By mid-morning, Jonah had sent the photographs, Judith's written authorization, the utility records, Audrey's statement, the delivery testimony, and the transport schedules to a county judge. They waited at the farm while the district attorney's office reviewed the application for an emergency administrative search warrant covering the unregistered west structures at Hollow Gate. Audrey sat on the farmhouse steps, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee Simone had brought. Mara remained beneath the porch, but did not enter the shadows completely. Ethan sat several feet away. "I thought you would hate me," Audrey said. "I have not decided what I think of you." "That is fair." "You want forgiveness too early." She looked into the cup. "I don't think I deserve it." "That can become another way to avoid doing the work." Audrey glanced at him. Ethan turned the collar in his hands. "Guilt is useful if it makes you stay when leaving would be easier." Mara shifted beneath the porch. Audrey watched her, then nodded. At 11:17, Jonah's phone rang. He listened without speaking, then wrote a warrant number in his notebook. "We have authorization," he said. The operation at Hollow Gate did not begin with sirens. County animal control officers arrived first, followed by 2 deputies, a state animal welfare investigator, and veterinary transport vans from clinics outside Millstone Creek. Jonah had insisted on outside medical support, so Hollow Gate could not claim the rescue effort was controlled by personal enemies. Ethan did not enter with the first team, neither did Bruno or Mara. They waited in his truck across the road while Jonah served the warrant. From the public entrance, Hollow Gate looked exactly as the town knew it. The reception windows were clean. Blue and white adoption photographs covered the lobby walls. A donation board displayed smiling families holding dogs beneath handwritten messages about second chances. Calder stood beneath those photographs when Jonah entered. Through the windshield, Ethan watched the conversation without hearing it. Calder read the warrant. His face remained calm until Jonah pointed toward the west gate. Then the calm disappeared. Officers opened the corrugated fence behind the public kennels. The hidden section smelled of damp concrete, concentrated waste, and overheated air. Rows of unregistered cages filled 2 connected sheds. Some dogs stood when people entered. Others remained curled against the rear walls, uncertain whether attention meant food or removal. Their identification tags did not match the numbers in Hollow Gate's public database. Simone moved from kennel to kennel with 2 outside veterinarians, assigning triage categories: dehydration, untreated skin infections, old pressure sores, weight loss, no graphic injuries. Just neglect accumulated quietly enough to become routine. Audrey entered only after Jonah called for her. She identified Willow's most recent enclosure from the cleaning chart. The last kennel stood behind a plastic partition. Willow lay on a thin rubber mat. Her black saddle coat had lost its shine, and her golden chest looked too narrow beneath the pale teardrop marking. When Simone opened the door, Willow lifted her honey-colored eyes, but could not stand on the first attempt. Audrey knelt outside the kennel. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Willow looked past her, toward the sound of dogs being moved in the corridor. Simone examined her quickly. "Dehydrated, weak, nursing recently. We transport now." The words traveled through the radio to Jonah, then to Ethan outside. Willow was alive. Ethan closed his eyes for 1 second. Beside him, Mara lifted her head. She could not have understood the radio. But Bruno leaned toward her, and both dogs looked at the building as Willow was carried out on a padded stretcher. Calder saw her. He turned toward the maintenance room. Jonah called his name. Calder kept moving. A deputy followed and found him beside a metal waste barrel, feeding papers toward a small flame. Smoke had begun curling beneath the lid. The deputy extinguished it before the fire spread. Calder was detained for attempting to destroy records covered by the warrant. He did not shout. He only repeated that the papers were outdated disposal forms. Jonah collected the half-burned documents. Among them were transfer payments, kennel codes, and copies of communications with Everett Mays concerning the Bellamy property. Everett himself was not present. Financial records later showed payments linked to off-record dog transfers and a pending sale agreement for Judith's farm to a regional storage company. Jonah opened a separate referral involving elder financial exploitation and fraudulent use of authority. But Ethan did not remain at Hollow Gate to watch Calder leave. Willow mattered more. The puppies had stayed at Simone's clinic throughout the search. Tessa had cared for them in the neonatal room, away from noise and unnecessary risk. By evening, Willow had received fluids, warmth, and a careful medical examination. She was weak, but stable enough for controlled contact. Ethan arrived carrying the puppies in the heated transport carrier. Bruno walked beside him through the clinic hallway. Mara stopped outside the treatment room glass. Inside, Willow lay on a thick blanket. Her head lifted when the first puppy cried. The sound transformed her. She tried to stand. Simone placed one hand gently against her shoulder. Slowly? Ethan sat on the floor. He lifted the puppies one by one, supporting their small bodies in both hands. He placed the first beside Willow's chest. Willow inhaled sharply. Then she began licking its face. The second puppy followed, then the third, fourth, and number 5, with the tiny star still marked on Tessa's chart. Willow nosed each one as though counting them through scent. She pulled the litter close. The puppies' cries softened into small feeding sounds. Ethan lowered his hands to his knees. He had spent days keeping them alive through measurement, heat, and discipline. Willow needed no chart to know them. Bruno lay across the open doorway, facing the hall. His body formed the same quiet barrier it always had, but there was no van outside, no kennel worker approaching with a rope. No one asked him to move. Mara remained behind the glass. Willow saw her. The mother dog lifted her head and gave one weak sweep of her tail. Mara's ears rose. She took a step toward the door, then stopped. Ethan did not call her. Bruno turned his head but stayed where he was. Willow released a low, humming whine. Mara crossed the threshold. One step, then another. Her body stayed close to the floor. She approached the blanket, smelled the nearest puppy, and flinched when it moved against her nose. But she did not retreat. Mara lowered herself beside Willow. Their shoulders touched. For several minutes, no one spoke. There was no applause in the hallway. No camera recorded the scene. Calder's arrest, the warrant, and the rescued dogs belonged to the world outside that room. Inside, there was only a mother reunited with her litter, a guardian lying across an open door, a frightened dog allowing herself to remain near what she loved, and Ethan sitting on the floor, watching closeness exist without becoming the beginning of another goodbye. Hollow Gate did not disappear in a single day. Its sign came down first. For nearly a week, the wooden board remained propped against the side of the building, the painted red heart and open gate facing the snow, like a promise no one quite knew what to do with anymore. The county suspended the organization's contract. Dogs from the hidden kennels were transferred to outside clinics, licensed foster homes, and temporary facilities under independent supervision. Every movement required 2 signatures now. Every medical record was copied. Every identification number was checked against old photographs, microchips, and Judith Bellamy's blue notebook. Calder Voss was not declared guilty by the town, no matter how many people wanted a clean ending. He was investigated for falsified records, unlawful transfers, animal welfare violations, and attempting to destroy documents covered by a warrant. Everett Mays faced a separate inquiry involving Judith's property, expired legal authority, and money tied to the movement of dogs and the proposed sale of her farm. Jonah reminded people that investigations were not verdicts. Mabel reminded Jonah that patience and satisfaction were not the same thing. Neither of them won that argument. Some questions remained without answers. Several dogs in Judith's notebook could not be matched to any current record. A few addresses led nowhere. One adoption file belonged to a house that had burned down years before the listed date. Another contained a photograph cropped so tightly that no background could be identified. The town wanted every missing name returned safely. The world did not cooperate. That truth followed Audrey Finch more closely than any punishment. She gave formal statements to county investigators, the State Veterinary Board, and attorneys reviewing Hollowgate's contracts. She spent hours comparing kennel codes with transport schedules and old photographs. Some people praised her for finally speaking. Others crossed the street to avoid her. Audrey accepted both reactions. She did not call herself brave. When the county assigned her community service at the temporary animal care program, she arrived early, cleaned kennels, entered data, and left without waiting for anyone to notice. Her mother's health remained fragile. Her employment insurance disappeared with Hollow Gate, but a county assistance worker helped arrange temporary coverage. It was not forgiveness. It was simply what came next. Winter loosened slowly around Millstone Creek. Snow still covered the shaded roads beneath the firs, but Main Street began to show dark strips of pavement. Meltwater ran beneath parked trucks. Icicles fell from the church roof one by one, striking the ground with small, bright cracks. Judith Bellamy returned on a pale afternoon in early March. Mabel organized the welcome and then spent the entire morning insisting it was not a welcome because Judith hated fuss. There were no balloons. There were, however, 6 casseroles, 3 pies, 2 repaired porch rails, and enough volunteer labor to rebuild a barn. Judith stepped from the county transport van wearing a gray cardigan beneath an olive barn coat. She was thinner than Ethan had imagined from her voice, her body slightly bent from illness and months of limited movement. Her white hair was gathered in a low knot. A silver German Shepherd brooch rested near the collar of her coat. Her eyes remained sharp. She surveyed the people gathered near the farmhouse and said, "If all of you have come to watch an old woman walk through her own front door, you need more demanding hobbies." Mabel laughed first. The rest followed with relief. Judith did not ask where Bruno and Mara were. She already knew. They stood beside Ethan near the open gate. Bruno's heavy black and gold coat had regained some shine during the week since Hollow Gate closed. Mara remained lean, though the sharpness around her ribs had softened. Both dogs watched Judith with a stillness different from fear. Recognition carried its own weight. Judith did not bend down. She did not call their names. She opened the gate and stepped aside. Bruno entered first. He moved slowly across the front yard, nose close to the snow-damp earth. He stopped at the porch steps, where the wood still held old scratches beneath the new repairs. After circling once, he lowered himself onto the exact place Audrey had said he used to sleep. Then he looked back. Mara had not crossed the gate. She stood with one front paw lifted, the cream-colored patch near her wrist visible against the mud. Behind Judith, a volunteer carried a metal chain toward the barn. The link struck the gatepost with a brief clatter. Mara recoiled. Her ears flattened, her body folded inward. The volunteer froze. Ethan raised one hand, not toward Mara, but toward the man with the chain. "Set it down." The man did. No one moved after that. Judith remained on the far side of the gate. Ethan stayed where he was. Bruno watched from the porch. Minutes passed. Mara lowered her paw. She approached Judith in 3 short stages, stopping each time the wind shifted. Judith kept her hands at her sides until Mara came close enough to choose the final distance herself. Mara touched her nose to Judith's knuckles. Judith closed her eyes. "That will do," she whispered. Mara stepped back. Then she returned to Ethan's side. No one treated it as rejection. Judith looked at Ethan, and something like approval passed through her expression. "She remembers me," she said. "Yes." "She trusts you?" "Some days." "Good. Trust should have days off." Weeks earlier, Ethan might have expected a decision to follow. Judith was the original owner. Ethan had become the caretaker. The dogs belonged somewhere, but Bruno and Mara had spent too much of their lives being moved according to what humans considered proper. No one asked them to settle the question that day. The farm did not reopen as the rescue it had once been. Judith no longer had the strength to manage dozens of dogs, and she refused to rebuild a system dependent on one person's judgment. Instead, the county approved a smaller transitional shelter with strict limits, independent audits, public intake records, and cameras accessible to outside monitors. Simone oversaw medical decisions, but refused the title of director. "I already have a clinic," she said, "and unlike committees, animals bite honestly." Tessa organized volunteer shifts, medication logs, and feeding charts with such precision that Mabel accused her of assigning the dogs military ranks. Jonah helped redesign the complaint process. Reports about contracted shelters now went directly to the county and an independent review address. No organization could receive or screen accusations made against itself. Audrey worked only under supervision. She never objected. Willow recovered at the farm. Proper food restored warmth to her golden coat. The narrowness around her chest eased. She remained wary of metal latches and men carrying clipboards, but she no longer struggled when Simone examined her. The 5 puppies grew with alarming speed. Number 5 kept the star in Tessa's notebook long after it was necessary. He remained smaller than the others, but developed the loudest opinions at feeding time. One puppy learned to untie shoelaces. Another discovered that Judith's cane could be stolen only if she was distracted by conversation. Judith called them the 5 witnesses. Ethan corrected her. They are dogs. They can be both. They should not have to be. Judith considered that. Then she nodded. The puppies would be adopted only after careful screening, home visits, and written records available for county review. Willow would remain at the farm until she chose to spend time away from them without distress. Bruno and Mara made their own arrangement. Bruno spent most afternoons at Judith's porch. He resumed his old position facing the road, though now he occasionally slept deeply enough for his paws to twitch. At dusk, he often walked back to Rourke's supply and repair. Mara divided her time less predictably. Some mornings she followed Bruno to the farm. Other days she remained beneath Ethan's awning, listening to the activity inside the shop. She visited Willow, but never stayed when too many volunteers gathered near the kennels. At night, both dogs usually returned to Ethan. They did not choose one home over another. They chose a route between places where no one closed the gate behind them. One evening, Judith arrived at the shop carrying a folder. Ethan was rebuilding a kerosene heater while Mara rested beneath the workbench. Bruno lay across the doorway, forcing customers to step around him with the solemn courtesy usually reserved for old men and church pews. Judith placed the folder beside Ethan's tools. "Care agreement," she said. He wiped his hands on the canvas apron. "For both dogs?" "Primary responsibility to you. Medical decisions shared with me when possible. The farm remains open to them. You could keep them. I could put my name on paper. That is not the same thing." "No," Judith said. "It rarely was." Ethan opened the folder. Judith's signature was firm despite the arthritis in her hands. "You are certain?" She looked at Mara beneath the bench. "I spent too long believing love gave me the right to decide where every dog belonged. Hollowgate took that idea and made it uglier." Her gaze returned to Ethan. "They belong where they continue to choose." Ethan signed. Mara slept through the entire legal transfer. Spring came in fragments. First came rain instead of snow. Then pale grass appeared beside the church steps. The fir trees released the smell of wet bark, and Main Street filled with open windows and the sound of tools striking wood as the town repaired what winter had loosened. Rourke's supply and repair did not become an animal shelter. Ethan refused donations of cages. He declined a suggestion that he rename the store Rourke's Rescue and Repair. Mabel claimed the alliteration was excellent. Ethan claimed she was banned from marketing. Instead, he placed a heavy water container near the front porch, a sealed bin of emergency food, and a weatherproof box containing the numbers for Simone's Clinic, County Animal Services, and the Bellamy Farm Transitional Program. Mabel established a small community fund for emergency veterinary care. She named it the Open Bowl Fund. Ethan complained that she had named it without asking. "That is what leadership looks like," she said. "That is what interference looks like. Very similar from a distance." The wooden sign took Ethan an entire evening. He cut it from cedar left over from repairing Judith's porch. He sanded the edges, burned the letters by hand, and sealed the surface against rain. No animal leaves hungry. Ask inside for help. He hung it beneath the Rourke Supply and Repair sign. The next morning, someone left a bag of dog food beside the door. By afternoon, someone else had left a note, thanking Ethan for fixing her father's heater during the storm. Ethan placed the note in a drawer and pretended he had forgotten it. The most difficult changes were smaller. A new county transport van began making weekly trips between Simone's clinic and the Bellamy farm. Its diesel engine was quieter than hollow gates, but the first time it passed the shop, Mara leaped to her feet. Her body tightened. Her eyes followed the van. Ethan did not reach for her. Bruno stood beside her, shoulder nearly touching hers. The van continued down Main Street. Mara remained where she was. She trembled until the sound disappeared, but she did not run. Ethan marked the moment privately. Not as recovery completed, as fear surviving without taking everything else with it. By late April, Willow could walk comfortably from Judith's truck to the fenced yard behind Ethan's shop. The puppies tumbled after her, larger now, all paws and ears, and poor decisions. One of them stole a worn work glove from beneath Ethan's bench. The others gave chase. Willow followed with more dignity, but less speed. Mara watched from near the door, then joined for 3 brief strides before pretending she had never considered it. A customer named Frank Delaney stopped at the gate carrying a lawnmower carburetor. Frank looked at Bruno on the porch, Mara near the door, Willow in the yard, and 5 young shepherds fighting over a glove. "You planning to leave any room for customers?" he asked. Ethan looked around. Bruno occupied half the entrance. One puppy had climbed into a box of shop rags. Another was dragging the glove beneath a tire rack. Mara stood close enough that her shoulder brushed Ethan's leg. "No," Ethan said. Business model changed. Frank laughed. Ethan let the humor settle before adding, "They never bothered anyone." He watched Mara release the glove when the smallest puppy tugged at the other end. They were just waiting for someone to notice what they were too afraid to say. The bell above the shop door rang as Frank entered. Ethan held the door open. Bruno stayed on the porch. Willow returned to the puppies. Mara approached the threshold. For months she had stopped there. She looked inside at the hanging tools, the scarred workbench, and the old place beneath the red lamp where 5 newborn dogs had once slept. Then Mara crossed into the shop. She did not rush. She did not look back. Ethan allowed the door to close gently behind her. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is not to pull someone closer, but to leave the door open and let trust choose its own time. Bruno and Mara were never without love. They had simply learned that showing it could cost them everything. Ethan changed their lives not by forcing them to belong, but by proving that compassion can exist without control. In our own lives, someone near us may be silent, distant, or afraid for reasons we cannot see. May we have the patience to notice before we judge, and the courage to make safety possible without demanding anything in return. Tell us what this story meant to you in the comments, and share it with someone who still believes kindness should give freedom, not take it away. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, healing, and second chances. May God give you the wisdom to recognize unspoken fear and the grace to respond with gentleness.